It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage Mike Mooney, an Andrus Center board member, 2 decades on the board, who also serves as the treasurer of the Andrus Center board. Mike Mooney is instrumental in moving forward one of the Andrus Center's funding priorities, our Stewards of Tomorrow. We're halfway to endowing a position to support our student services and to support extending the work that we do here into the public land stewards of tomorrow and the future generation of students. So ask Mike afterwards about how you can support Stewards of Tomorrow or check it out on our website. Mike will be introducing our final keynote of the conference this year. Welcome up, Mike.
Thank you for being here. It's an honor to be up on stage. I think am I the second man on the stage? This very dangerous. Cecil Andrus never worried about this stuff, but for me it's a little more intimidating. I had the good fortune to work with Cease as a banker, and then I worked with him on his center for many years, and then we got the good fortune to work with Tracy, and I'm sorry that Tracy's gone. She was kind of the passion of the Andrus Center, but we're keeping it kindled. Jenna and Andy and our team, Danielle and Emily, are doing a great job. So I want to tell you about Christy Neuhoff. I first met her in 2008. I was active with St. Luke's on their board, and Christy applied for and was chosen to be the chief legal officer at St. Luke's Health System. And she was about 20 then, I think, maybe a little older. But she joined an organization that was very much in transition, and an industry that all of you know, the healthcare industry is just totally crazy. It's complex, it's complicated, and very difficult industry. We're very fortunate to have St. Luke's in town. But to give you a perspective, when Christy joined St. Luke's, there were 6,500 employees there, and did you inherit 2 attorneys? 1 attorney. And I'm not going to tell you how many attorneys there are now, but there are more. And there are also today over 17,000 employees at St. Luke's, and that may be old data. I haven't been on the board for a while. But Christy oversees everything from legal to compliance to internal audit to governance, risk management, and that's in addition to the roles that she serves in leadership within that organization. So where does she find time to do all this? I honestly don't know. But she just completed, not too long ago, a MBA. She's got other degrees, but have you ever heard of MIT? So, if I was going to get an MBA, I'd go to ISU, because I'm from Pocatello, but she went to MIT and did that remotely, and I think she graduated with honors. One of the great things about Christy is the passion that she has for her Cherokee heritage. In 2023, she was recognized as the Cherokee Nation's Community Leader Individual Award for the work that she's done there, leading the task force to protect women and families. And in addition, she chairs the Cherokee National Historical Society. The task force work resulted in improvements to address intimate partner and family violence, and Christy is currently, in her spare time, leading the effort to renew and reopen the Cherokee Heritage Center. So I attended a keynote speech here 11 years ago with Christy, and we all got to listen to Sandra Day O'Connor. Any of you remember her? She talked about civics, and I'm not going to get into that, but not enough of us were listening. She could still be here speaking about that. But one of the things that Sandra Day O'Connor talked about was a person and some people that she held up as heroes for herself, and that people were her mentors. And she said, well, one of this person, I think it was actually Eleanor Roosevelt, but I'm not positive, but she was a shero. and I'd never really heard that before. So it's a great term, and it happens to be Christy's maiden name. So I've always held her up as a shero for more than one reason. She earned her undergraduate degree from Dartmouth College, and I recently heard her do the Dartmouth College cheer song. I don't think she wants to do that today. She got a Juris Doctorate from the University of California in Berkeley, and then I mentioned MIT. So she's fairly well educated. I have the good fortune to serve on a board with her here locally, a not-for-profit board, and she's an invaluable member, as you'll find out from listening to her. I like to say she listens to the detail. She remains calm, cool, and collected. And she only speaks when she actually has something to say, which is very refreshing based on the fact that I'm on a lot of boards. We all like to hear ourselves talk, but she's more like E.F. Hutton, I guess, in that regard. She's inspired many of us with her devotion to healthcare, for Idaho, and for her extended community activities. When Christy speaks, people listen. I ran into a friend of hers on the way out, and I said, well, how would you describe Christy? And I liked what she said because it's accurate. She said that she is humble, kind, and really smart. She said other stuff, but that's enough, because Christy will be really irritated with me. So please join me in welcoming Christine Neuhoff to the stage.
I wanted to start with saying something just very brief in Cherokee. Osio Nagata, it means hello, everyone. I know that likely no one in this audience speaks Cherokee, and while I do know some words, I cannot claim to be a Cherokee speaker. But in honor of my elders, my ancestors, and my tribe, it seemed right to have spoken Cherokee on this stage today. So it's such an honor to be here among this impressive lineup of speakers. You might wonder why I am speaking to you today, and I might wonder the same, but I believe that my purpose in being here is to share with you some of the principles and values that I have lived by and that I believe have helped me serve my community and represent my family well. I will say it would be a lot easier for me to stand up here and talk to you about some legal issue, so this will be out of my comfort zone, just so you know that. As Mike mentioned, I serve as Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer at St. Luke's, and I've been there for 16 years. In that time, I've developed a legal department, hired the first full-time compliance officer, not recently, that was nearly 16 years ago, and our first audit officer. I've also taught Sunday school, coached cheerleading, served on the boards of the Cherokee National Historical Society, the Boise Philharmonic, the Learning Lab, the Idaho Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, Catholic Charities of Idaho, Delta Dental, the American Heart Association, the Essential Hospitals Institute, and I've chaired some of them. I've also served on a variety of committees for various associations and professional organizations. And while I've not done all of these things simultaneously, I have always been involved in more than one outside activity, and often several. And sometimes people ask how I find time to do these things outside of a full-time job. And I do have to say that I have found participating in meaningful organizations outside of work to be something that recharges me because I enjoy contributing to the well-being of our community. So I don't really think of it as more work. I think of it as something that's enriching. So this picture is of my grandmother when she was about 2 years old, and these are her parents, my great-grandparents, Frank Johnson and Nancy Christie. While those sound like English names, Frank Johnson and Nancy Christie did not speak English. They only spoke Cherokee. And Annabelle Johnson, as was her name then, only spoke Cherokee at that point in time as well. So to tell my story, I feel like I have to begin with my grandparents, or perhaps even earlier, but I think they set the stage for who I have become and am becoming, and who my children are and who they're becoming. My mother's parents, Jack and Annabelle Hummingbird, were born in the Rocky Mountain area of Cherokee Nation, in what had only been Oklahoma for a short time. Their parents were born when it was still the Indian Territory, which was combined with the Oklahoma Territory to become the state of Oklahoma in 1907. And this is significant in our tribal history for a number of reasons. So, following what was known as the Trail of Tears, which was the forced removal of the Cherokee people at gunpoint, on foot, approximately 1,000 miles from the southeastern United States to the Indian Territory in 1839, Cherokee people had reestablished our government, reestablished our newspaper, built the first public building in the territory, built and run the first school for women west of the Mississippi River. That school was known as the Cherokee Women's Seminary, or Female Seminary, and also built the Cherokee Male Seminary. The treaty under which our people were forcibly removed promised that no state would ever interfere with our new reservation. However, with Oklahoma statehood, our tribal jurisdiction, reservation boundaries, self-governance were all disrupted. So from shortly before my grandparents were born until shortly after I was born, our chiefs were appointed by the federal government. During that intervening period of time, from 1907 to the early 70s, the impact on our society was substantial. And I will say, since we regained the ability to elect our own leaders in the early 70s, our recovery really has been remarkable in a fairly short period of time. So back to my grandparents, both of them went to the Chilocco Indian School in the 1920s and early 1930s. Chilocco was a federal Indian boarding school that was established to assimilate Native students, to eliminate their Native identity, and teach them mostly agricultural trades. Some federal Indian boarding schools taught industrial trades, but this one was an agricultural school on about 8,900 acres that had been provided by Cherokee Nation to be used for this purpose. Not sure that there was actually much of a choice. The girls were also taught domestic skills. Speaking your own language was strictly forbidden and resulted in significant punishment. These schools were not teaching the kinds of skills that were taught in mainstream public schools, as they had a different purpose. My grandmother's parents sent her to Chilocco when she was 8 years old. Their family was extremely poor, and they believed it would be good to send her to a place where she would be fed, clothed, and educated, and which made it easier to feed and provide for the rest of the family. She found it very difficult to learn English. She and my grandfather, and likely all of the other students, learned that it was a disadvantage to speak their own language. And I'll say, all of the people I know who had a parent or grandparent who went to boarding school did not have the language passed down following that boarding school generation. There may be some, but none of the people that I know have had the language passed down after boarding school. During my life, my grandmother did not say much about her Chilocco experience, but when she did say anything about it, she actually mentioned the things she appreciated. Meeting and becoming friends with students from other tribes who she would never have otherwise met, and learning skills that she found useful, and some skills she even liked. She and my grandfather chose not to teach their children the Cherokee language, though they still spoke it to each other and to other people. So my mother and her siblings did not speak Cherokee, and their grandparents did not speak English. So the communication within the family was a little bit impaired as a result. My grandparents wanted their kids to have the same advantages as the white kids. That's why they said they weren't teaching their kids the language. And at least to the extent that not having a Cherokee accent helped with that, they at least had, eliminated, I suppose, one source of discrimination. They raised their children near Chilocco on a farm that straddled the state line between Oklahoma and Kansas. They had no running water and no electricity, and in the early years, my grandfather plowed the land with horses. That may sound like a hard life, but it was just life. And they were grateful for what they had: a roof over their heads, land to farm, and a good family. My grandmother saw the importance of education, and while neither she nor my grandfather had a high school diploma, she encouraged all 6 of her children to graduate from high school and go on to further education. The boys went to junior college and the girls went to nursing school. My mother started at junior college and decided she wanted to go into nursing. She especially encouraged her daughters to get an education. She said it was important for them to be able to support themselves. Often she said it was important for them to be able to support themselves when their husbands left them. My mother and her sisters wondered how they should take that, but anyway. So 2 important principles I've always taken away from these stories from my grandmother, and that I have, I think, truly internalized, are that there is good to be found in every experience. And you should get the best out of the opportunities that you have. And every challenge is an opportunity. My mother followed her mother's advice and went to nursing school. Oh, I forgot to show you all the kids. It's not quite all the kids, it's 5 of the 6, and my grandmother's in the back. This shorter girl in the front is my mother. So my mother followed her mother's advice and went to nursing school in Oklahoma City. After graduating, she moved to Dallas, Texas, where she worked in the emergency room at Parkland, which is a very large public hospital. She actually arrived at Parkland about a year after JFK had been taken there following the shooting. So she worked with the people who had taken care of JFK, or tried to take care of JFK. She then decided to become an Army nurse. By 1969, she was working at the Army hospital at Camp Zama in Japan, caring for soldiers who were injured in the Vietnam War. One of those soldiers was my father, an infantry officer from Western Pennsylvania. It's my mother. It's kind of blurry, but it's her. The first time my father saw my mother, he asked her her name, and she said, "Lieutenant to you," and walked away. It must not have been too long after that she did actually tell him her name, because 6 weeks or so after they met, they decided they should get married. And about 6 weeks after that, they had a wedding in Japan with no family and only 2 witnesses. They had to have 2 weddings because you had to have a Japanese civil ceremony, and my father was Catholic, so he had to have a Catholic wedding too. So they had two ceremonies. My father actually came back to the States before my mother and went to go meet her parents by himself. Like, "Hi, I married your daughter." They did like him, and actually they thought that was very courageous of him, so it really endeared him to them. So, and I should say, too, that my parents were married until my father passed away a little more than 52 years after they met. And he actually passed away ultimately due to complications from Agent Orange exposure during Vietnam. So, actually, this is the 2 of them. She was a captain before he was. And one time, this may have happened more than once, someone called for my dad and asked for Captain Shiro, and my mother said, "Speaking." And whoever it was thought that was hilarious, and then my father set them straight that actually she is Captain Shiro. So anyway, my father was my hero. He was a Green Beret, an airborne ranger, a mathematician, a runner, the ultimate protector. I always felt safe. Storyteller and a loving father. So when I was a very young girl, I wanted to be him. And by that, I mean I wanted to be an airborne ranger. And as I grew older, I learned that women were not allowed in ranger school. And that actually only changed in recent years. I think the first women graduated from ranger school in the last decade. My father remained in the Army until I was 5 years old. Among the numerous places we lived in my first 5 years were North Carolina and Georgia. From each of those places, we drove through Knoxville, Tennessee on the way to see either of my parents' families. And since they did not want to choose one family over the other, they chose to settle in Knoxville. Vacations involved visiting family, which I loved doing, and we had many long summer road trips, and we used to have cars without air conditioning, so road trips from Tennessee to Oklahoma in the summer were interesting. As I was growing up, my grandmother used to come stay with us for extended visits. My grandfather had passed away a few months before I was born, so I never knew him. I loved spending time with my grandma Hummingbird, hearing her stories, getting her to teach me Cherokee words, and simply being in her presence. I hoped that one day I would be able to do work for the benefit of our tribe. I will say I always knew that I would go to college. That was never a question in my mind. And I always did all of my schoolwork, and I did it well. And I was really quite confident, actually, once I was old enough to realize no one was telling me to do this, I was just doing it. I was thinking that my parents must have been very effective at imprinting this on me when I was young, and I hoped I'd be able to do that with my children, which I think maybe I did. It never occurred to me to not do all my work, and I expected myself to get A's. I received the Outstanding Student Award for almost every class in high school, and I was involved in a lot of activities. I ran track and cross country, and I played soccer. I added a year. I did 1 freshman year, 2 sophomore year, 3 junior year, and I also participated in and then led several service and academic clubs. So vice president of the student body senior year. While these activities did take a lot of time, they allowed me to contribute to the well-being of my school, which contributed to my own well-being as well. I was not doing these things because I thought they would be useful on my college applications. In fact, that didn't really cross my mind. I was doing them because I felt a commitment to be active in my community and serve where I could, and that's something I got from my grandmother and from my parents. It did strike me when I started receiving recruiting materials from top colleges that I could potentially apply and maybe even go to one of those schools. And the one I chose, as Mike mentioned, was Dartmouth College. One of the main draws for me to Dartmouth was its commitment to educating Native students. Dartmouth was founded in 1769, so before the United States was the United States, and its charter says it was founded to educate the youth of the Indian tribes, the English, and others. As it turned out, the college did not, in fact, educate many natives between 1769 and 1969. And at the time of its 200th anniversary, the president of the college decided to recommit the school to educating Native youth and started a program to proactively recruit and retain Native students. So when I applied to Dartmouth College, which was not in 1969, the college had more Native students than all of the other Ivy League schools combined, and may have still had more than all of the schools east of the Mississippi. I had a lot of adjusting to do when I started at Dartmouth. It seemed like everyone else had gone to boarding school and not the kind that my grandparents went to. And no matter which one they went to, it seemed like they all knew each other. I learned that many people have very different concepts of what is normal than I did. It definitely broadened my horizons. Also, good grades were not as easy to earn there as they had been in high school. The rowing team was recruiting first-year students for Dartmouth novice crew, women's novice crew, and I decided to try out. And one of the big reasons that I initially thought about crew, I mean, it looked cool, but one of the reasons that I really initially thought about it was that women's crew did their spring break training trip in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which was very near my family. and I knew I would not be able to afford multiple trips home during the year. So a free trip close to home seemed like maybe a nice thing. As it turned out, I loved crew. It became the most prominent part of my college experience. My parents used to say I was majoring in crew. I did it all 4 years. I still maintain a connection with my teammates. I see some subset of them every year, except perhaps during that shutdown year or so. I also maintain other connections with Dartmouth College. I currently serve on the board of the Native American Alumni Association for the college, and I'm on my class executive committee. And next month, Dartmouth will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of women's rowing, so I'll be meeting up with my teammates there for that. Looking forward to it. One lesson that I've learned and that I try to keep in mind is that things may not always work out the way you have in mind. And I feel like I missed something here. Slide-wise, I did. So that's me. And the baby. And and you saw Frank Johnson and Nancy Christie, my great-grandparents earlier, that's them, and my grandmother and my mother. And here's Dartmouth College, okay. So things may not always work out the way you have in mind, but overall they work out as they should. One significant example was my law school admission experience. I did not apply to law school before graduating from college. I decided to take some time in between. And during that time off, I got engaged, and my fiance was starting graduate school while I was applying to law school. He decided to attend Stanford in part because there are multiple law schools in the Bay Area. I applied to Stanford, UC Berkeley, and the University of Michigan, which had been his second choice for graduate school. It's obviously not in the Bay Area. I was thinking I'd make him move if I didn't get in the Bay Area. And I was accepted at Berkeley and Michigan, but waitlisted at Stanford. And at the time, I thought I really needed to get off the Stanford wait list. It was going to be much more convenient because we were going to be living on campus at Stanford. So I would otherwise be commuting a pretty long way to UC Berkeley. But the closer it got to the first day of school, the more excited I got about the opportunity to go to Berkeley. And I do have consistently felt it's worthwhile to get, the wedding, sorry. Surprise. I do think it's good to get a wide variety of experiences. And I think the Stanford, and I thought this then too, but I still wanted to go there at the time. I do think the Stanford Law School experience would have been substantially similar to the Dartmouth undergraduate experience. You know, a small, intimate, private school. They're really trying to make things easy for the students to navigate. I'm not talking about academically, but the other stuff. And UC Berkeley, on the other hand, was a very different kind of school than Dartmouth. Actually, I used to walk across the campus thinking, this is the anti-Dartmouth. But so going to a large public school gave me many opportunities to navigate bureaucratic processes. And my Berkeley law experience also gave me numerous opportunities to advocate for Native students. And I'll share two examples that have perhaps become more meaningful to me as time has passed. So at the end of my first year, I had good grades. I was invited to be a student instructor for legal writing for the following year, and I decided to participate in the write-on competition for the law review. Of course, I was disappointed when I was not selected. But then in talking to other students, I learned that none of the students of color that I knew were selected. And two things seemed striking about that. At the time, our class was 30 to 38% people of color, so it was a high percentage. And I knew that many of those students had outstanding academic performance at the law school. The topic we were assigned to write about was a death penalty issue. And it related to whether it was appropriate for a judge to decide whether aggravating factors warranted the death penalty, or whether that issue should be decided by a jury. It turned out that all of the people I knew who were not selected had concluded that a jury should decide whether to impose the death penalty. And I cannot say whether I would have been selected for the law review if I had chosen a different conclusion, but it did seem like there might be some inherent bias in the process that was used, given the bigger picture that I and some other students were seeing. We did not protest the decision. We did not ask to appeal the decision, but what we did do was ask to meet with law review leadership to discuss the concerns that our observations raised. And they were open to having the discussion. And they did end up modifying the write-on process for the following year while still keeping the applications anonymous. So they added a few other elements to that application package. And I was pleased to learn in the next year that one of our Native students was selected for law review the next year. Several other people of color, students of color, were selected that next year. And I can't say in any individual case whether the change in process made the difference, but looking at the big picture, it feels as though it may have. So we felt like that was a success. I will also note that in 2002, the Supreme Court decided that a jury should decide those aggravating factors. So during my second year, I was president of the Native American Law Student Association, and the law school was converting the old law student dorm into offices for faculty and student organizations. At the time, student organizations were housed in cubicles in the basement of the classroom building. The dean invited all of the student group leaders to see the floor plan so that we would know what to expect in the coming year once the renovations were complete. When I looked at the floor plan, I was dismayed to discover that there was no space designated for the Native American Law Student Association or for our Hopi Appellate Court clinical program. When I asked the dean about it, she said that our group was small and did not warrant space, and that no one was guaranteed to have space. I found that answer unacceptable. Our group may have been small, but we were as active as any other student group and had just as much a need for space as the others. Leaders of several other student groups were similarly concerned about this plan to leave the Native students without space. I wrote a letter to the dean explaining the concern and explaining why both NALSA and the clinical program needed space and suggesting that we could share one. Other student groups expressed their support for our proposal, and the dean had the plans updated to provide the requested space, and I can tell you the space was well used as soon as it was completed. I actually loved law school. I loved my classes. I loved the opportunity to serve on various committees within the school. I represented my third-year class in law school student government, and I served on the National Native American Law Student Association board. I even enjoyed the opportunity to overcome challenges, though I would have preferred those specific challenges not have arisen. But challenges do arise in life. Personal challenges and professional challenges. And again, I look to the lessons learned from my grandmother and my parents. There is good that comes from the challenges we encounter, and we grow from facing them and getting through them. While I did have the opportunity to work on Native issues in law school through our Hopi Appellate Court Clinical, where we worked as off-site clerks for the highest court of the Hopi tribe, I did not go into Indian law out of law school. I knew my husband was going to be finishing his PhD, looking for a faculty position, and I didn't know where that would ultimately take us, so I wanted to be as flexible as possible. So I clerked for a federal judge and then went to a large law firm. The judge I clerked for was the first woman to be appointed to the federal bench in the Southern District of California. She had already been on the bench for 17 years when I clerked for her, and she was several years younger than I am now. She valued diversity of thought. Each year, she would select one clerk who was more of a public interest person and one who was more corporate. She wanted different perspectives to be brought to bear on the decisions she was making, and she also valued brevity. We were expected to keep everything 10 pages or less, except in very unusual circumstances. I learned a lot on that job, and I learned a lot from her. When I was working at the large firm, I was doing intellectual property litigation, and I did actually enjoy that work. I enjoyed learning about the different technologies that were under dispute, and I enjoyed the intellectual challenge, of the firm. I even enjoyed working the long hours to an extent. After my husband finished his PhD and his postdoc, he was selected to join the faculty at the University of Florida. And at least at the time, there were no firms in Gainesville, Florida, that were doing work comparable to what I was doing. I was supportive of moving without knowing what I was going to do in the new location. And almost by chance, I met the general counsel for the health system associated with the university. He really made in-house health law sound like a great career. Complex legal issues, dynamic landscape, continuous learning, the ability to help improve people's lives. And as it turned out, everything he said was true. I loved working in-house there. He offered me opportunities to develop depth and breadth, and I found, depth and breadth of experience that I found rewarding and that prepared me to take on a chief legal officer role. And he said it was his goal to see me in that type of role before he retired. We should all have a mentor or sponsor who will do that for us. I would not have found that opportunity if I had been rigid about what I expected my career path to look like. The things that mattered to me in my work could have been found in any number of subject matter areas. And I had not specifically thought of health law before that, but that move led me to find a calling. And I think it was the most significant career move I have made, because without having taken that opportunity or had it, I would not have been in a position to even know about the job at St. Luke's, much less have been prepared for it. When our son was in second grade and our daughter was in pre-K, I learned of the position at St. Luke's in Idaho. And I seemed to have what they were looking for. And my husband said if this was a good move for me, he would gladly leave the University of Florida to move to the Mountain West. He's a geologist, a hiker, and a hunter. So it's kind of ideal for him. He wanted me to like this place. And I will say, when I came out for the interviews, it all just felt right. And I interviewed with a lot of people when I came out for the interviews at St. Luke's. And, it is good to do interview practice, but what I didn't do and didn't want to do was think about what will they want to hear from me? Because if they hired me, they were going to get me. And I didn't want to have, done too much, figuring out how to say what they wanted to hear. I figured they needed to hear what I was really thinking. And it worked really well. When I first came here, as Mike mentioned, St. Luke's was a lot smaller than it is today. And in many of the meetings that I went to, there were very few women around the table. And in most meetings back then, when you go into the conference room, certain people would be around the table and other people would be along the walls. And my personal inclination would have been to sit along the wall. Like, I don't need to take, up somebody's space at the table, and I'm not sure that I'm invited to be at the table. But the way I decided I needed to think about it was not where should I, Christy Neuhoff, be, but where should this role be? This role should be at the table. So I sat at the table. And I think about that when I think about where I might speak or where I might be. Where should St. Luke's be? And where should my role be? And if we should be there, I'm going to be there, even if my personal inclination might be, I don't want to make too much of where I am. But I need to represent my organization the way it should be represented. So I think I'm almost out of time here, so I'll quickly mention, I said when I was young I wanted to find a way to help my tribe, or I hoped that I'd be able to do that. I have been out there repeatedly over the years. I used to go twice a year regularly. once for my grandmother's birthday, once for the Cherokee National holiday. I have lots of family still on the reservation. And at some point several years ago, I had the opportunity to interview with some of our chief at the time's staff, and they were trying to identify Cherokees from outside of the reservation who they could maybe attract to come back to either work there or contribute in some way. And they asked me what I would be interested in doing, and I said I'd be interested in doing anything that could help improve basically anything if I can do it part-time and from a distance, because I wasn't going to be moving to Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Actually, I wouldn't mind living in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, but my husband has already said he won't. So he's not leaving Idaho. So and I don't really want to leave St. Luke's either. So I was asked to be on the board of the Cherokee National Historical Society, and then I was elected to chair it at the first meeting. And shortly after that, Chief asked me, or Chief Hoskin, our current principal chief, to lead this task force to protect women and families. And I don't know exactly what led him to ask me to do those things, but if my chief asks me, I'm going to say yes. And so I did. And I have found it all to be very rewarding. So I think the kind of three things from these stories I just want to make sure I call out are that there's good in every experience, and you should get the best out of the opportunities you have, and each challenge is an opportunity to grow. Things may not always work out the way you had in mind, but ultimately they work out. And it's not good to be too rigid in your plans, but it is important to know what you value in your work and the other activities you participate in, and seek that out. And I think I'll end with this quote from Wilma Mankiller, that can you read it? Do I need to read that? Recognizing the good, not just in one's own personal circumstances, but in the world, makes anything possible. When I'm asked about the important characteristics of leadership, being of good and positive mind is at the top of my list. If a leader can focus on the meritorious characteristics of other people and try to play to their strengths, as well as find value in even the most difficult situation, she can inspire hope and faith in others and motivate them to move forward. Wilma Mankiller was our principal chief in the late 80s.
Christine, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I'll remind the audience for one last time, if you have a question that you would like me to ask, please write it down on one of those comment cards, hold it up, and one of our amazing volunteers will run around and pick those up. So thank you for sharing your story with us. And it's so interesting to learn how people end up in Idaho, and it's almost never by accident, right? Mm-hmm. There's some sort of purpose. And I would love to hear you say a little bit more about your deep commitment to contributing to the well-being of your community, mm-hmm. which you said several times and demonstrated all the way from high school really to where you are now, serving on boards and chairing committees and doing that work. And you seem to have a really capacious definition of community. It's really sort of broad. So could you say a little more about that?
Sure. So this is actually a deep-rooted Cherokee value. It's working together in community. The word is gadugi. You'll probably see it if you look at anything on Cherokee Nation's website. But that's something that my family has always modeled. My grandmother donated her father's allotment for a community building in the Rocky Mountain community. At her 99th birthday, they named it after her. And my mother's siblings, who all live in that part of the world, have dedicated their entire retirement life to working with the Cherokee Council of Elders. So it's just something that I'm accustomed to.
That's wonderful. Another interesting thread through your story was this sort of commitment that your family and your community had to education, even though educational spaces have had a really paradoxical history with Native people. So they've been a tool for taking away language, but also a place for opportunity. So I'm curious if you could comment a little bit on that paradox.
Sure. So, and there's a lot to be said about that, actually. So for hundreds of years, actually, Cherokee people have valued education, and in particular, after contact with Europeans and then colonists and then Americans, really tried to learn the ways of the people who they were interacting with. And our belief has been, if you're going to succeed in the society you live in, you need to be educated in the society you live in.
Fascinating. So what advice do you have for someone looking for a mentor to influence their career choices like the ones that you spoke about?
Well, I would say look at the people who are doing what you want to do and find a way to meet them if you don't already know them. And a lot of people are open to meeting someone who's interested in their path. Not everyone has a lot of time to do that sort of thing, but a lot of people are interested, and if you ask, you're not going to get a yes if you don't ask.
Very good. So one of our audience members would like to know how you find the confidence to be so strong in your values and convictions.
I have no idea. No, I think it's probably really something that was taught to me by my parents, but something that I've become stronger in over time. You know, just as you live and get to understand better why the things that matter to you, it's easier to have confidence in holding firm to them.
This is in some ways a follow-up from a member of the audience. I find Indigenous women so strong, powerful, and inspiring. Aside from your family, are there any Indigenous women you find inspiring, modern, from history? What is their story and why?
So yes. Of course, Wilma Mankiller, she's a distant relative, but she was incredibly inspiring. So she largely grew up in Oakland, California. Her family moved as part of the Indian Relocation Program when she was young. You may not know what that program is. I won't go into a lot of detail, but there was a federal program to get Indigenous families to leave their tribal lands and move to big cities with promises of better jobs and better education that didn't necessarily pan out. So Wilma largely grew up in Oakland, and she became really active in the Native community there. She came back to Cherokee Nation after she had children and got divorced. She came back to Cherokee Nation, and she really just started working as a community organizer, helping bring water to a rural community. And from there, she really took on a lot more of a leadership role. It was suggested to her that she should run for deputy chief, and she did, was elected deputy chief. The principal chief at that time was asked to serve in the Reagan administration, and she became principal chief because of that. And then she was elected in her own right after that. She's an incredibly strong leader.
That's a great reference and person for people to read more and learn more about. Another audience member says that you mentioned sitting at the table. What advice do you have for someone who's transitioning from not wanting to be seen to having to take up space and be seen and be a leader and sit at that table when it doesn't come naturally?
So being such a person, I would say, I think it really helps to think about what is needed at that table. And if you are the person that has the voice or a voice that is needed at the table, then you should, I can't say you should be comfortable, but I think it's worth the effort to be there.
So other folks are wondering about your time management skills, given how you've balanced all of those. So do you have practical advice for people that are looking to do some of the work that you're doing, but just don't know how to fit it in with everything?
It's a good question, and sometimes I wonder myself how I fit, things in. But it does seem like if something is important to you, I don't want to say we have unlimited time. That's not true. We really don't have unlimited time. But we do, I think, have more time than we think we have. So it does mean that there are some things that I'm not doing. And some of the things that I'm not doing are, I'm maybe not keeping up with my house as well as I could. And my kids are out of the house now, so I've had a little bit more time since they left the nest than I did when they were here. When they were here, I would still make time, but I did a lot of things really early in the morning and after they went to bed, and I don't have to do that so much anymore.
Yeah, and that shift kind of happens over time, and you learn to let the house go, right?
Yeah. You have to think about what's really important to you and then prioritize what you need to spend your time on. And if the house is that important to you, don't let it go. And maybe you'll do fewer outside activities. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend people, take on a lot, but take on something if you're passionate about it.
One of our audience members says that the highest peak in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park was recently renamed to the traditional Cherokee name, Kuwahi. Thoughts? Can you speak to the value or significance of this?
Yes.
And yay!
Yes. So it was not lost on me growing up in East Tennessee and near the Smoky Mountains that I was actually growing up in our historic homelands, even though that was no longer our homeland. So I thought about that a lot when I was in the Smoky Mountains, and I went to the Smokies a lot. My grandmother had some beliefs about being in the Smokies overnight, and anyway, so it's a long story, but I think it's really special that name has been brought back. It means Mulberry Place, but that place had a special significance to our people when we lived there. There is still a group of Cherokees who are there. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in North Carolina are very close to this. Well, they're more or less in the Smoky Mountains, and it is because of them that it got renamed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's excellent. Thank you. There are a couple questions about how your job at St. Luke's and how St. Luke's has been in the news, the national news, including with the fall of Roe v. Wade and the preceding state laws that have sort of brought it into the public sphere. So could you comment a little bit about how your job has changed and what challenges have come up with that?
Oh, sure. I mean, this job has always been interesting and fulfilling, and something that I didn't expect necessarily was the ways in which our organization would be called upon to stand up for our patients and our providers when sometimes things happen that impair their ability to get the care they need or their ability to provide the standard of care that they should be able to provide. And so, in that particular instance, we can hold true to our values of taking care of our patients and taking care of our providers by speaking up. And so that's why we have.
This will be our last question, but one of the audience members has observed that your modesty and humility exudes into all of the activities that you've talked about. Is that a cultural attribute? Is that something you've worked on cultivating, or is that a product of your legal training?
I don't think it's a product of legal training, but I do think it's a cultural attribute.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Thank you.